Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan, and joining us as always is Greg Cosell. He's our tape breakdown aficionado, and of course, you've seen him on ESPN's NFL matchup show, senior producer at NFL Films. Fellas, this could be considered the game of the week that we are about to break down today. Two powerhouses in their respective conferences as the Eagles are in Baltimore to battle the Ravens in Week 13. Eagles have won 7 straight games. They're 9-2 as they chase the Lions for the top seed in the NFC, and the Ravens are 8-4. They are battling with the Steelers to win the AFC North and get the highest playoff seed possible in the AFC. And as we've talked about a little bit leading up to this, it could also be a matchup of NFL MVP frontrunners as the Eagles, Saquon Barkley is making his case. He's coming off a 302 total yard game against the Rams, while Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson is the league's reigning MVP, and he leads the league so far in passing yards, touchdown passes, and QB rating. Greg, you watch a lot of tape, and I know at this time of the year, there are some games, I want to single out some Thanksgiving games, but there are some teams that are playing each other that have nothing to play for. This is going to be a game that I think when it's time to watch the tape, you're going to get excited about. You're going to see a lot of good plays and a lot of good players.
Yeah, well, these two teams are fun to watch, really, on both sides of the ball. I mean, the Ravens' defense is not exactly what it's been in past years, but they're obviously offensively, because Lamar's just a different cat, and the Eagles' offense with Barkley being so dominant and that O-line being so dominant. There's so many really fascinating elements to this game, which I know we're going to get into momentarily. But yeah, this should be a fun one.
And Adam, we talked about this, and I'm going to repeat it just for those who, maybe if they didn't catch our Friday pod. This is not week 5 or 6 for the Eagles anymore, where they're trying to work through things. To me, this game is not a litmus test for them anymore. If they lose the game, they lose the game. They win the game, they win the game. I'm not going to go into Monday or Tuesday thinking, oh man, what happened? I remember in 2017, we've talked about this a lot, right? When the Eagles won 8 or 9 straight games and they went out to Seattle and they lost to the Seahawks, right? This is a week before they played the Rams, and then Carson Wentz got hurt. And I remember being on sports radio and the Eagles lost to the Seahawks. You would have thought that because the fans were completely jumping off the ship because, it was the first real team they played and they beat up on a bunch of patsies and their true colors were no. We had to calm things down that day on sports radio. I feel the same way. This is just a game between two good teams, and the better team on today will win.
Honestly, what I said on our show was, if they get blown out, I'm not worried about it. It's a non-conference game against a quarterback that is so unique and so amazing. The only time they'd face him again would be in the Super Bowl. So that's it. And by the way, they'd have 2 full weeks to prepare rather than 6 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing you gotta understand. So I'm not. To me, I'm just looking forward to seeing the 2 QBs play somewhat similar, but obviously much different because of their styles and the way that they play. But there's some things they do that are similar. And then you've got these 2 running backs. And Derrick Henry, to me, it's so fascinating. I cannot wait to hear what Greg thinks about the meshing of Jackson and Henry, because this is something we've not seen before. They tried to trade for him at the trade deadline last year. They didn't get Derrick Henry. They got him now. And some of the things that are going on with Baltimore's defense, which you can't understand, and we need to ask Greg that. There's so much we have to dig into, guys. So let's get after it.
Yeah. So
I would just say one thing.
Yeah.
The Eagles are obviously a good team, but they've been able to play in this 7-game winning streak in a certain kind of comfort zone.
Yes.
So the only thing I would say is, if the game becomes one in which they can't play in their comfort zone, that would be the only thing. Not that it's concerning and you all of a sudden say, boy, they're a bad team, because they're not a bad team.
Right.
They're a good team. But that would be the only thing that I think you would think at some point they're not going to be able to play in their comfort zone.
Oh, and that's a great point, and I thought about that too. But I guess we would say, though, in the bigger picture, right, Greg, how many teams are going to be able to get the Eagles out of their comfort zone?
And that's a very fair response. I'm not
right. And if it's a team in the playoffs, well, that's what we think could happen anyway. I mean,
and
no
that's
one's
what
saying
the
they're
playoffs
definitely
are.
winning.
You play better teams.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Right.
So let's get into the injury situation. The big one for the Eagles is they're not going to have Darius Slay today. The concussion, it's very hard to come back from these concussions in a week. It's been done, but not often now, especially nowadays. So Isaiah Rodgers will get the start in place of Darius Slay.
He's
Uh,
been very solid.
he has been solid, and I would say if anything's a litmus type of test, it will be for the defense today, as they're facing a real sophisticated passing offense and some good quarterback receiver combination. But what have you liked so far, Greg, about Isaiah Rodgers?
I just think he's played well. I mean, obviously this is not a big press man team where you see a guy do that, but I think he's played well. I don't think, look, the reality is Slay's a veteran, but his traits level has diminished somewhat over the last year or so. So he's not the Darius Slay of 4 or 5 years ago. Um, so Rodgers, when he plays, has played well.
Hmm.
I don't think there's been a drop off in terms of the talent level at this point. So again, we don't know what's going to happen today. You never know what's going to happen next.
Right.
But just based on the snaps he's played this year, and there have been games he's played a lot of snaps, he's done well.
Now, Slay is the right cornerback, correct?
He's the left
I'm sorry,
corner.
the left. I'm sorry, I was
Yeah.
viewing it from the other side. Yeah, the
And that's
left
what they do.
cornerback. So that's
It's
where
left corner, right
Rodgers
corner. They're
will
not
play.
going to change that.
Right. Now, who would ordinarily, when you watch Ravens tape, is there someone that you could say will ordinarily or most of
No,
the time
they're
line
not
up,
like
or they
that.
move around a lot, don't
Yeah,
they?
they move around a lot.
All right. Adam, the only thing about Rodgers, you love his speed. And by the way, Adam, we've talked about this. It's been a long time since the Eagles could say they could pull a number three corner out who can run a 4-3 or four
I
two,
know. I
or
know.
who's played in the league and has had some success. I mean, they tried it with Greedy Williams last year. That didn't work out, didn't even
Oh,
make the team. But when's the last time you remember the Eagles feeling pretty good? I should honestly, it's been a long time since they felt pretty good about their two corner. So it's great that they can have a three corner that they can at least have some confidence in.
yeah, and he had meaningful playing experience, and Rodgers did with the Colts before his suspension,
Yep.
and he's revived his career. He's looked good now. He's a smaller guy at 5'10". He may be 178. You saw, Greg could confirm this. Nakua, I think covered him. I think he was on Nakua a little bit in the game last week after Slay got hurt, but it's not like I know Baltimore now has actually pretty good depth at receiver. It's not like they've got guys for 6'3" and 6'4". I don't worry about that. And we've talked about we know Rodgers can run. Yeah, you're right. This is the first time. Boy, we'd have to go really far back for when they had a really good backup corner, like a third corner, as you talk about. That's a really good point. I didn't thought of that, but they do. But I'll say this: Baltimore, and we're going to get into how they play offense. First time in many years, they've got pretty good depth at receiver.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And they spread it around. As far as being out, Ben Van Sumeren also out today.
Johnny Wilson, unfortunately, and I know he really only is out there to block, except playing in the red zone a little bit. Johnny Wilson came up with a hamstring problem after Thursday's practice. He didn't work on Friday, so that's an issue. Moro Ojomo was clear with a neck injury. That was a new injury.
Yep.
C.D. Brown now has a knee injury. So yeah, all of a sudden, Jeff, after Friday's practice, they had a lot of problems.
Yeah, and obviously the Devontae Smith situation looms. He was able to get out on the practice field on Thursday and Friday and limited. He was listed as questionable. He's an important part of the offense. And Greg, you would think that this game, yes, the Eagles have done really well running the ball. They don't have to have the greatest passing offense in the world, but you want to be at full strength offensively when you're facing a team like the Ravens, who have scored the second most points in the league.
Without question. I mean, these games, you never know. The Ravens have also had a couple of games this year where, they've not scored very much and they've struggled to move the ball. But yeah, for the most part, you would think that the Ravens would score.
Yeah. All right. So for the Ravens, generally a healthy team. Now they lost Charlie Kolar, their third tight end, to a broken arm. Greg, they play, as Adam and I discussed on our pod the other day, they play all their tight ends. So how will they function without Charlie Kolar? He was their number three tight end, but again, they play a lot of personnel that involves the
Right,
third.
but I mean, they did, but I don't think that is that critical to their offense. I mean, they do, and it's
Mhm.
obviously a package that they use. And clearly they're not an 11 personnel offense. They play a relatively low percentage of 11 personnel relative to the rest of the NFL. So, that's not something that they do a lot of. They do play a lot out of 21 and 22 personnel, as we know. So Kolar being out, I mean, yeah, they play out of 13 personnel,
Hmm.
but I don't think that's going to be a huge factor in this game. I mean, I think they'll play with Likely and Andrews.
Got it. Now, a huge factor is that Roquan Smith was cleared to play. How does that change the Ravens defense to have him?
Oh, it he's a great player. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny because Malik Harrison actually played last week in place of him, and Malik Harrison played well. But Roquan Smith is one of the best stack backers in the league, so getting him back is absolutely critical. So yeah, that's really important. I mean, he's just a really good player. And by the way, the Ravens have not played as much 13 personnel as you probably think.
Okay. Yeah, it is sort of you think about the old Ravens and how they do play a lot of what I want to say sub offensive packages, but they do put
Well, they do.
tight ends and
Keep in
fullbacks
mind
on.
that they play 35% of their snaps with Patrick Ricard on the field. That's a high number to play with a fullback.
It
Yes.
is.
And we'll get into
Greg,
that.
I have one question. Just comparatively going from Todd Monken, just as an overview when you watch tape, do you see differences between Greg Roman and Monken stylistically at all?
It's funny. I think that the pass game is more expansive, but I think that the feeling was, and I actually spoke with a coach about this. I
Okay.
think the feeling was that when Monken came in, they would make a transition from being a heavy 21 team, 22 team, two tight end team, and play a higher percentage of 11 personnel, meaning three wide receivers. And the percentage is a little higher than it was under Roman, but don't forget, Lamar Jackson, because of the contract issue, missed all of
Right.
last season, the off season. So they couldn't really put in everything they wanted with 11 personnel. And Lamar is very comfortable with the 21, the 22, the 12. So they ended up going back to it last year, and it turns out that that's what he's most comfortable with.
Right.
So they end up, you've got to play to what your quarterback is and to what he's most comfortable with. So even this year, it's a little higher percentage, but they still have the lowest percentage in the league of playing with 11 personnel. It's only about 30%. That's a very low number for the NFL.
Hmm. So let's get into it. We'll start off the show in the analysis part talking about the Eagles defense versus this Ravens offense. And it's funny that we talk about Todd Monken. I mean, he was criticized pretty heavily last year when the Ravens lost to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game for his game plan. He didn't stick to the run, and for Lamar gets criticized because he hasn't played well in the playoffs. And sort of like the Lions have went scorched earth on everybody after their playoff loss last year, the Ravens offense has gone same way, scorched earth on everyone. I mean, they're getting great passing from Lamar and his receivers. They're getting great running out of Derrick Henry. They seem way more equipped against good defenses, Greg, and I'll leave it to you here, to attack the way they want to attack so they don't feel they have to do one or the other because they are a very balanced offense right now. Number two in the league in scoring.
Yeah, but I still think it starts with their run game. That's the foundation. Now, obviously, Lamar's a major factor in that because quarterback design runs are pretty significant in their offense, and you have to defend that. But 64% of Derrick Henry's 221 rushes this season have come out of 21 and 22 personnel. And he's
Mhm.
averaging 6.6 yards per rush with 19 rushes of 10 plus yards out of 21 and 22 personnel. So that raises to me what is maybe the most critical matchup for that unit against the Eagles defense. What have the Eagles become since Cooper DeJean has become the guy? They've become almost 90% nickel.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is,
Mhm.
are they going to play nickel versus 21 and 22 personnel? Or do we think back to New Orleans week two? When they played with a lot of 5D linemen, and sometimes they bring Bond up on the ball and they play with a six-man front. Are they going to do those kinds of things? Does that mean Cooper DeJean is out of the game? This is
Hmm.
a major question that we're going to find out today, obviously.
Yeah.
But I guarantee that this was a major late night a whole bunch of scotches kind of conversation with the coaching staff to decide how they want to play. Because, this is, I mean, Cooper DeJean's a really good player, but he's not a 290-pound defensive lineman.
Right. Right.
Right.
No. So let me ask you a question off of that, Greg. So let's move this forward. This season, visually, we don't have to go by, percentage, just from your tape study. What have teams done to try to slow down Lamar and Henry when they're on the field together? Is there anything like, because you just talked about things you can do, but what have teams tried to do to slow this down?
Well, look, the run game is the run game. I mean, they try to do it with more people in the box.
Yeah.
The normal things you can do with a run game. I mean,
Okay.
there's not 100 things you can do to defend a run. You change up your fronts. You try to what you do, and teams can do it in far more detail than I am. So I'm just being honest.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
one person, so I can't do a hardcore breakdown of every
Okay.
single one of their runs. But somebody's done that on the Eagles staff. Okay, somebody has broken down their runs based on the formation looks, based on everything that goes into the run game. But at that point, then you line up a certain way, and then you have to defeat blocks, or you have to shoot gaps, or whatever it is you do. I mean, we've seen Baun and Dean be really good shooting gaps this year. I'm sure you're going to see some of that. The bigger issue is what you do with Lamar, because with Lamar, he's a factor in the run game, a big factor in the
Major.
run game,
Yeah.
because you can't let him get outside. You can't let him get outside clean. And
Right.
then and then you get the pass game where you have to decide, how are we going to rush? Are we going to, you can't run past him. Are you going to use a spy? There's multiple ways in the pass game to try to deal with him. I mean, I've seen teams where they rush and they literally just kind of stop, and it's just so he can't leave the pocket.
Mush
So they'll
rush a little bit.
throw the ball. But, so there's a lot of things you try to do, but
Hmm.
from people I've talked to over the years, people always say that until you actually are on the field with him and you see him move, he moves faster than you can practice.
Hmm.
You brought it up, Greg. I've been thinking about it all week because as great as Cooper DeJean has played and as instrumental as he's been for the Eagles defense, I don't know how you come out in your nickel package against this 21 and 12 personnel team. We've seen the Eagles be a little leaky sometimes in run defense. I think that you're going to need against this team your five-man front. So
And
I
you
think you're
make,
going to need Milton Williams, Jordan
yeah,
Davis, and Jalen Carter, and you need your edges to be. I
Jordan
can't. And
Davis is
this is,
going
by
to
the
have
way,
to
is
have a
where the
big
loss
game.
of Brandon Graham is going to loom even larger because your
This,
edges are going to be Nolan Smith and Josh Sweat, and Nolan out there might not be the
and I
best.
assume Jalen Hunt's going to get meaningful snaps because they're
Hmm.
just going to need a rotation. And Jordan Davis has to come up big in this game, and because more than likely he's going to have to play meaningful snaps.
Yeah.
Last week he played 15 snaps. It was the nature of the game too, but this might be a game where he has to play 40, 45 snaps.
hmm The only thing maybe, as you mentioned, guys, if you try to play nickel, so you have your four-man front, you have Baun and Dean as your linebackers, Cooper DeJean's in there, and then you bring Baun down on the line of scrimmage more to give yourself a five-man front. But that puts an awful lot of stress
Well, then
on
you're
Kobe
definitely
Dean.
going to have to play single high because you're
Yeah,
going to have two stacked players because otherwise there's no cutback player.
exactly
So
right.
you're
I was gonna
going
say
to
that puts an
have to
awful lot of
bring,
stress on your
yeah,
interior
yeah, because the
defense.
problem with if you're with teams that play a 5-1 front, is that there's no cutback player on the second level.
Right.
So there
Do,
has to be a cutback player.
do you recall anything, Greg, that the Browns, I mean, the Browns have a good defense. They've shown that all year long. They have good defensive personnel, but I believe they are the last team to beat the Ravens, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, the
Yeah,
Steelers did
and
too.
if I remember that game, I think Henry only had 10, 11 carries. They got away from him in that game.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And I think what happened is they realized, because that was 2 weeks ago, right?
Actually, I think it was a couple. The Steelers were probably the last team to beat, now
Yeah,
that I think about
because
it.
I
And
mean,
that
it
was
was
a
clear
slugfest.
that this past week that they wanted to give the ball to Henry because there was a game, it might have been the Steelers game, where Henry
Yeah.
had 4 rushes going into their final possession in the first half.
Yeah, I
And
think
then
that
they
was
ended up with
Steelers.
4 on that possession. But he only had 4 rushes until there were like 3 minutes to go in the first half. And this past week against the Chargers, they were not going to let that happen.
Right.
So, Greg, I want to touch on that Baltimore-Pittsburgh game, which was one of the most physical games I've seen from home. Just watching it off TV, I was like,
What week
wow.
was that again?
That was on November 17th. That was
Week 11.
week 11,
Yeah.
yes. Week 11 at Pittsburgh, and a very low scoring game, very physical, your typical Pittsburgh-Baltimore game.
Yeah.
Any interesting takeaways from that game with Lamar? Because people had asked us what happened to Lamar that game. Well, we got you to talk about that. So what do you remember about that game, if you recall?
I remember that the Steelers were incredibly aggressive with pressure and man coverage, and which is very Mike Tomlin-ish, because Mike Tomlin is not a let's react to other people. He's
Yeah.
we're going to dictate and let the chips fall where they may. So they pressured a lot, and I think if I'm trying to get my notes up for that,
Sure.
but that was the essential version of that game. That was week 11. Was that week 11?
Yes,
Correct.
it was week
Yep.
11.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember they were very aggressive. They played far more. I remember watching the tape and just feeling like, oh my God, they played a boatload of man coverage. I mean, which normally you don't see because of the Lamar factor.
Mhm.
Now they did, as I recall, I think they did spy him on occasion. I'm trying to get my notes, but the key thing was it was man and pressure. They did not sit back. It was not a game where they just, tried to, oh, let's keep everything in front of us. Let's
Sure.
let's play, that way. They did not play that way at all.
Hmm.
Can I ask you
Interesting.
just one little follow-up off of that? Have other teams, Greg, taken the approach of, okay, we're not going to let Lamar dictate. We're going to be more aggressive, or have you seen some teams really react and play like a different defense? Because you told us about when the Eagles played the Saints in week 3. Okay, they dropped ball in the box. They brought a different front to take away Kamara's ability to cut back. Is there anyone that you see any tape over the years where a team says, "Wow, we're going to do this for 1 week. We're going to bring out something different that they haven't seen"?
I would say at this point in Lamar's career, it's not something that he hasn't seen. It's what you choose to do. Like here, I'm looking at my notes from the Steelers game.
Nope.
I made a point that they were highly disciplined with both their pass rush and their zone coverage concepts. On the back end, they read routes and did not get caught in conflict. Um, uh, when they did play man, Fitzpatrick was the predominant matchup on Andrews, but he's a great safety. I mean, they
Yeah.
have that guy. He's that guy.
Mhm.
So they rushed 5 or more on 15 of Jackson's 35 dropbacks. And while Jackson had number success, watching the tape, it did not have a big impact on the game that he had number success.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I think one thing we should watch for is when if the Ravens are able to get into the red zone quite a bit, do they try to get the matchup of CJ Gardner-Johnson on a tight end or an interior receiver where we've seen CJ not be as much of a playmaker as he has been in the past there. And
Right.
then I wanted to ask you, Greg, does Baltimore do any no huddle? Because you would think with the Eagles so thin right now at defensive end and Nolan Smith being a thinner guy, not a power player, that if they're able to move the chains, they're going to try to keep Nolan Smith and Jordan Davis, these guys who are not used to playing a whole lot of snaps and playing a lot of, keep them on the field and see if you can tire them out.
Yeah, they do. They will. I mean, I don't know how much, but they do and they will.
Mm,
The other thing that happened in that Steelers game, which you can't necessarily count on, is Linderbaum, the center, did not have a very good game. Now, Keanu Benton is a really, really good player, the D tackle for the Steelers, but
No.
Linderbaum did not
Yeah.
have a very good game. He got beat a number of times in that
Hmm.
game. So you can't count on, I mean, you can't go into a game saying, well, Linderbaum's going to get beat,
Yeah, sure, of
But
course. Sure.
yeah.
It's a nice little Big Ten battle of Wisconsin versus Iowa there.
Right.
The other thing too is the Steelers played a lot of single high, so very curious. You almost have to because of the run game element. It's hard to play too deep. Say, although in the quote unquote quarters, the safeties are run players as well. That's
Mhm.
their first responsibility. So you could certainly see that.
Let me ask you a question. Is there on their offensive line, just again, just when you would watch, is there a weakness to their offensive line, Baltimore's?
Um,
Curious.
I mean, yeah, theoretically, I mean, they start a rookie right tackle who's been up and down,
Rosengard.
Roger Rosengarten from
Yeah.
University of Washington. They moved Falele, who was a tackle in college. He plays right guard. Now, he is a big dude now.
Oh
He's
my
like
God, isn't he like
370
400
pounds.
pounds almost? I mean, he's
Yeah. I
enormous.
mean, they play McCarry at left guard. Uh, I hate to say this, but I would probably say that he's just a guy.
Hmm.
Right.
Wow. And
I
by
think
the
I
way,
think
there was
Lamar probably helps those guys out by moving
Without
around so well
question.
on the
yep.
pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rosengarten, I had an offensive line coach tell me if he would have drafted him or the GM drafted him, he had to coach him, he would have moved him to center. He didn't
Yeah, I
think
mean,
he didn't think he was a
I
starting tackle.
personally didn't think that his tape was worthy of where he got drafted, but again,
Mhm.
that's.
All right, so
Yeah.
so the reason why I brought this up, it's very clear that the Eagles are facing an offensive line that's okay, but it's one that's beatable, so that's good to know.
I think it is.
Now,
But I think Jordan Davis has to be a really important player in this game.
yeah, when you say teams like the Steelers show good pass rush discipline, what are you saying that they don't get upfield fast, that they rush but then hold their rush to make sure
Yes,
that
then
they're
they
not
stop because
past Lamar?
you can't have your ends run past Lamar Jackson.
Right.
And even in the inside, you can't create lanes for him to run.
Right. See now, if the Eagles had Brandon Graham, who is just so
Oh,
disciplined, knows exactly what
yep.
to do, doesn't rely on speed as much as his power. Nolan Smith is the guy that wants to get upfield, use that speed, get around the edge. He's going to have to be asked to rush in a different way now, and we'll see. That'll be a challenge for him and the defensive line. Let's talk about the secondary versus these Ravens wide receivers. Greg, is there a match? Zay Flowers, very good second year wide receiver. Is he the Boston College kid? Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I watched a ton of him coming out because I kept thinking he was going to come out and he kept going back.
Right.
Oh.
Um, yeah, Flowers is their movement receiver.
Mhm.
He's going to line up all over. He's going to be in motion. That's the way they use him. He's a really good player. I would I'm not Vic Fangio, obviously, but I would not expect the Eagles to try to play a ton of man coverage in this game relative to some of their other games. When I
Right.
say that, I don't mean they're not going to play any man. I don't want people to think, they're going to play 2 snaps of man the whole game because it becomes situational, down and distance, field location. But I would think because of the movement and because guys line up in different spots, I would think this would not be a heavy man coverage game for the Eagles relative to other games.
I would
Sure.
agree on that. Bateman's been an interesting guy because I feel like he's been a pretty disappointing player as a first round pick for the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of his career. But he's finally this year, he's not great, but I think he has the second most receiving touchdowns on the team, maybe third in receiving yards. Are you seeing him just used differently in year two of
Well,
Todd
they're an
Monken's
interesting
scheme?
pass game.
Hmm.
Jeff, because of Lamar, it's not like watching like Detroit's pass game where everything is rhythmic and boom, 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 and you see all the receivers, do their thing. Obviously Lamar's capable of that, and there are games where that he does play that way based on the game. But there's also a lot of movement. There's a lot of off-script plays. You know, so Bateman does have a good feel for finding space when Lamar moves.
Hmm.
And that's you need to have that feel when you play with Lamar.
Yeah.
That's an important trait for a receiver.
And I include Andrews, their ability to come back to the football,
Yeah.
because obviously the longer you play, you get a feel for it, just like Mahomes when Tyreek Hill was there. And obviously Kelsey now with Mahomes, but yeah,
And Andrews is there, Kelsey. Andrews has a
yeah,
great feel for
yeah.
finding space when Lamar moves.
All right, so let's flip the switch here. Let's talk about this Eagles offense against this Ravens defense because you have a really good sub story here, and that's an Eagles rushing offense that is number one in the league against the Ravens, who have the number two rush defense, yet number one in yards per carry allowed. So, what do they say about the immovable force versus the
Yeah.
resistible object, something like that? So this to me is the answer. And Greg, we've seen this. The Eagles sometimes get off to a slow start with their run game. Against the Commanders, I think they got off to a slow start. The Cowboys, and then
Yeah.
they stick with it. They stick with it, and eventually Saquon Barkley breaks your back. So this will be a big test, though, whether they want to stick with the run defense or if they smell blood in the secondary and try to come out throwing. I haven't done that in a while. I don't. My sense is they're going to want to stick to their bread and butter.
Well, it's funny because if you look at Barkley, and you nailed it, Jeff, the way they play, Barkley's second half rushing yards, I think, would be fifth in the entire league.
That's crazy.
So,
Just overall for
so
rushing yards, unbelievable.
yeah. So I think that's true. Because I know Gibbs yesterday,
Mhm.
on Thursday, excuse me, gained, whatever yards, so he might have passed
Yeah.
Barkley. But the point is the way they've sort of played, and now it's their identity, is they're a running football team. Their defense is good enough that games never get out of hand, and they play a game of attrition. So in the
Mhm.
second half, you got to defend Barkley. And I mean, look, obviously not every week are you going to start the third quarter with a 70-yard touchdown run, but
Yeah.
still, you got to defend Barkley in the second half of games. And, you know, they get into a lot of short yardage situations. And then that's where Hurts becomes a factor in the run game. That's where, and even if he drops back to pass, if it's not long yardage, he becomes a factor as a scrambler. I
Yep.
mean, the whole game is kind of built around the fact that they can run the ball, and their O-line is really, really good.
Yeah.
So, you know, they play a certain, you sort of started this our show this morning with the whole premise that, hey, if the Eagles lose, it doesn't mean that anything's really different. And this is the way they play.
Yeah.
This is the way they've chosen to play. This is the way they want to play. Now we can sit here and debate. Look, Adam knows you play a certain way for the most part because of your quarterback.
Hmm.
So this is the way they've chosen to play. That hurts as far as the pass game is a complementary piece. As far as the run game, he's a significant factor.
I would say this though, and this is kind of what we started this at the top of the show. If and Jeff pointed out, if they're behind, let's say they're down 14-0 at half, right? And they feel like they got to throw. You got AJ Brown. Greg, let's move this back to you. If they had to throw, what has happened to the Baltimore secondary? Because they're giving them a number of big plays this season.
Yeah, they're giving up a lot of big plays this
What
season.
does it look like? What's happened here is from going from Mike McDonald to Zach Orr here.
Yeah, well, they've had some injuries as well. Nate Wiggins missed some time. He's a rookie, so they had to play a couple of games with Jalen Armour Davis, and he got beat. Brandon Stevens, he's their right corner because they don't switch sides. He's their right corner. He's been their starter for a couple of years. He's probably a beatable player. Um, I think Marlon Humphrey missed a couple of games. He's now back, and for the most part, he's played pretty well. They're an interesting defense, Adam, because they play a lot of different packages, and sometimes if you do that, it can, it's tough to settle in. But they play big nickel, where they play three safeties. They play a Darius Washington, Kyle Hamilton, and Marcus Williams, and in that grouping, Hamilton is essentially a slot corner if there's three wide receivers, or he can be a box player or an overhang player. They play regular nickel. They play dime. When they play regular nickel and Hamilton's a safety, they play. It could be Marlon Humphrey in the slot. It could be Arthur Morlett in the slot. So there's a lot of moving parts to their secondary, and I'm not sure they've settled in to the way they feel. Their best people. We know
Okay,
Kyle
I got you.
Hamilton's a great player.
Yeah,
He's a
Hmm.
great player.
sure. By the
But
way, is Zach Orr using him differently than McDonald? Anything visually you see when you watch, he looks a little different?
he's being deployed without, studying it. Like if I had five guys who just studied the Ravens
I got
defense
you.
like teams do, but he's essentially being deployed in a similar fashion in
Okay.
terms of the fact that they play big nickel and therefore he can be in the slot, but he also plays regular safety.
Okay.
I think it's also important to remember that last year you had career years out of guys like Patrick Queen, out of Geno
Yep.
Stone, out of the pass
Stone was really
rusher.
good for
Who
them
they
last
have?
year.
Clowney. Clowney had a good year. So they've lost not only an elite play caller in McDonald, but also three guys who had unbelievable years last year.
Keep in mind they benched Marcus Williams for one game, so they
Yeah.
obviously weren't happy with him, and now he's back, but they benched him for a game.
Right. A guy that the Eagles once showed, just
Oh
as
no,
well
he's been
as
a
the
good
Ravens
player,
did.
but
Yeah.
obviously he wasn't doing what they wanted, and he was a healthy scratch. That was probably about a month ago.
That was a
And
discipline thing. Yeah, as I understand, it's a discipline thing. There's
okay,
something going on. But
yeah.
oh, Jeff just mentioned something. It was actually between the Eagles and the Ravens to sign Marcus Williams. In
No,
fact,
he's a good player, so maybe it
yeah,
was discipline. Yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah. Jeff, real quick, Jeff, you
Mhm.
remember it? There was a time 24 hours before that we thought he was coming to Philly, and as
Yep.
a matter of fact, the Eagles actually matched Baltimore's money, but
Yep.
he chose to sign with Baltimore for some reason. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that made at the time, Baltimore was a little bit known more at the time for its
Yeah.
defense and its secondary, and
the
they
other
threw
thing
their
to keep in
safeties.
mind,
Yeah.
they've. I'm trying to remember all their games. I can't remember every single game. I watched
Yeah.
so many games, but they've scored a lot of points. The Ravens, correct? Yeah,
Yeah, they're the
Mhm.
second highest scoring team in the
yeah,
league.
yeah. They've been ahead out big in a lot of games.
So you give
So
up a lot of
so
pass yards,
so the
right?
passing yards is a little skewed. I mean, it's a little. I'm not saying they're a great pass defense,
Right.
but it's a little skewed. You know,
Sure.
because teams then have to throw and you gain yards. It's the old John Gruden, insignificant yards thing. You got to be a little careful about how you evaluate that because teams have to throw.
That's where those great stats of expectation and DVOA come in, to
Yeah.
your point,
Yeah,
Greg.
yeah,
Yeah. So, but to your point, they're 31st in passes. That would be second worst. But in yards per pass play, they're 24th, which is a pretty big difference. It's still, again, not great,
yeah.
but
Again,
they're not the worst in
look,
the
I'm
league.
sure they want to be
Yeah.
better. They're probably working on that, but it's a little skewed.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about with Barkley and the unbelievable year he's having, and they can be patient with him. Jalen Hurts and this exploiting this Baltimore defense. Do you see a lot of room to get the ball to AJ Brown outside the numbers against this Ravens defense, like they've tried to do
Absolutely.
against other teams? Will they see a lot of cover, one safety high, cover three areas where
Well,
Jalen
first
Williams
of all,
is
you
played?
want to attack Brandon Stevens for sure.
Okay,
And when they go nickel, you want to attack Nate Wiggins. He's a rookie. Now, Wiggins has a boatload of talent and he's long and he can run, but
yeah,
he's a rookie.
right,
So you definitely want to do that. I mean, I'm not saying that's the first play of the game, but who knows? Um, look, at some point, I'm not saying they're going to turn into a passing team. That's not my point. But at some point, they're going to come out and try to attack with the pass game.
hmm
And who knows? This may be the week. They may feel in this game that they don't want this game to be one of those close games in the third and fourth quarter because Lamar can break anybody's defense on any given play, and you don't want to get stuck in that situation. I'm not
yeah,
saying that, look, it's not likely they're going to be ahead 30-10, but you these one score type games with Lamar Jackson can be difficult.
yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, Adam, Nick Sirianni on Friday. To Greg's point about one score games, which the Eagles haven't had to play a whole lot lately. Nick
Yeah.
Sirianni on Friday said, I don't even know if I can count on I'm paraphrasing, two hands, how many fourth quarter passes we attempted in the
Yep.
month of
Yeah.
November,
That was
right?
funny.
So,
Yep. Yep.
so I can see how I guess the litmus test, if you want to talk about it for the Eagles, even though we're not going to overreact to a win or a loss, is
Yeah.
if they're forced into a game where they have to throw the ball to win and be effective throwing the ball, that's not really been their strength. They are not a highly ranked passing offense. In fact, I think they're in the 20s, something like that. We know they've been a rush offense. They can throw the ball. They have been explosive, but they have not been consistently throwing the ball well compared to some of the better, like the Lions or other offensive teams, the Ravens for sure. So if they can't muster up or they can't match and they fall behind and the passing game isn't there, I can see people saying, "Oh, well, now I'm worried." But again, that's probably been the concern about this team, regardless. And there's not that many teams that are going to put them in that scenario where you're down
Right. And
17.
it's also, look, we've discussed Jalen Hurts and his strengths and weaknesses. We don't need to have that same conversation again.
Right.
But his scrambling does become a fact, just like Lamar. You get into these moments where it's 3rd and 7 and you think, oh man, now you're in must pass, pure pass. You got to complete a pass. That's all well and good. And then what happens is he drops back and, if he gets out of the pocket and he runs for 12 and it's a first down.
Mhm.
That's the other factor you always have to account for when you play Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, all those guys can do that. And that does factor into how a defense has to play.
See, Greg and Jeff, the thing that I like though is, and Greg, you just broke it down. Brandon Stevenson, I had someone tell me he should be a safety. He's not. He didn't think of as a corner. This guy does, advanced work for the team. That he works or he had Baltimore last year. So he said Stevens is an okay player. You could debate whether he should be an outside corner or however they utilize him. But Wiggins is a guy that Jeff and I had some information on before the draft. He's a little bit thinner than you'd like, very talented, but it also he needs to be better a run defender. I know you don't talk about that a lot at the corner. That was a knock on him coming out of college, but the, we just talked about it. They've given up. Hamilton, as great as he is, their secondary's given up a lot of big plays this year. This is a beatable defense. If they can protect and they have to throw, it's not like they can't do it. They just have not. They haven't been in a situation where they've had to do it. But to say they can't do it, you don't know until you get there.
Yeah.
And you've got AJ Brown.
I would say they can't do it,
yeah.
And they do it a certain way. Look, it's funny. I've already watched, because it was Thursday's games, I've already watched the Lions offense and the Bears, Lions Bears game, both sides of the ball. And, when you watch someone like Jared Goff, you can just see the progression speed with which he plays with, that but he's had to be that way from the time he was probably 8 years old and he picked up a football, because he's not going to run around and beat you. So he sees the game a certain way. Jalen Hurts, I'm sure, has been up through pretty much college the best or second best athlete on the field, and so he sees the game a different way than a Jared Goff or a Kirk Cousins. So there's certain things those guys can do that Hurts can't do. There's certain things Hurts can do that those guys can't do. Then it becomes a value judgment. What do you like better? What helps you, quote unquote, win? And then you start getting into other factors. Right now, Hurts is on a team where they run the ball exceptionally well. They've got a dominant O-line, a top 3 O-line in the league. The defense over the last 7 games has played at a really high level. So now, there's so many variables and other factors. So if they have to throw, is he going to look like Jared Goff or one of those guys? No, he's not going to look like that, but he can run too. And that's a factor, and you got to defend that.
And boy, it breaks the back of a defense when they do everything right and then give up an 8-yard run on 3rd and 7.
I mean, what was it? Was it 2 weeks ago where at the end of the first half it was a Washington? Was it Washington? Where he had the 24-yard scramble at the end of the first half, and then they ended up scoring a touchdown? Because again, Washington played really poorly there from the standpoint of Jalen. They opened up the whole middle of the field.
Yeah. You saw it. No, but my point was this. With Brown, with Goddard, okay, I think we'd agree. AJ Brown's a top 3 to top 5 receiver. He basically
he's a top 5. If you started to make a list, he'd be in the top 5.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. And Goddard's a really good player. He just doesn't get the ball enough. But they've got enough talent around him. And you mentioned the offensive line with protection. I'm curious to see what would happen if they're down. I mentioned this earlier. If they're down 14-0 or down by 14, if they got to throw, what this would look like. Because 2 years ago was amazing. Hurts was incredible. Downfield passing. They're not getting the same looks. What would happen 2 years later?
I don't think they would change anything, Adam, until they got to the second half. Even if they were down 14-0 in the second quarter, I don't think they would change anything.
Well, what's funny, they've stayed with the run like Andy Reid never did. This has been pretty fascinating. It's funny you mentioned that, because it's like, and I know people put a lot of weight on what the players said to Sirianni about they have to stay with a run and be a running team, and that's fine. But I didn't expect this. This is remarkable to me that
you have 2 backs in this game in Barkley and Henry we normally think that explosive plays come out of the pass game because that's normally the case. But you've got 2 backs who can make explosive plays in the run game. So I to me, the Eagles would not abandon their approach. And abandon's a strong word, but they wouldn't significantly change it until I think late 3rd quarter, early 4th quarter. I mean, obviously, if they're down 3 scores, that's different. Yeah. But if you're in the late 3rd, Adam, and it's 24-14, I don't think they would dramatically change yet.
Saquon,
but I could be wrong. I'm not killing more.
Honestly, based on the way that the run game is, and by the way, usually it's when Barkley gets incredibly hot in the second half. Sure, I can certainly see that.
Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Josh Jacobs, perhaps the most 3 significant offseason additions of all of the NFL offseason.
The run game has kind of come
back. They're all running backs
too. I mean, teams are running the ball. They're running effectively. Look, Barkley's on pace. He's going to gain 2,000 yards, barring anything unforeseen.
Yep.
Henry could, I mean, you could have three, four 1,500-yard rushers this year.
And look at Detroit's tandem. Okay, look at that
They're
tandem.
both going to get 1,000,
It's crazy. I
barring
mean,
injury, barring injury.
Yeah.
Did not expect this. Did not expect this.
And if you look at the numbers in given games, guys, just
Yep.
as an aside, teams are running I mean, you look at the Lions on Thursday against the Bears, what they did in the first half. You look at the Packers last week against the 49ers, they had 42 rushes, 22 in the first half.
Pass attempts.
I mean, teams are running the ball.
Yep. And doing it effectively.
Yep.
All right. Let's wrap this up. We'll give our predictions for the game and our player of the game.
This is a hard one, Jeff.
I know.
Wow, very, very hard.
I mean, this is like one of those I flip a coin. I mean, I was thinking about it all week because obviously the Ravens and Eagles are two teams I know very well because they're good, So I've watched. This is a hard one.
Yes. So let me set the stage here real quick because the odds makers have basically told you that they think these teams are equally matched. On a neutral field, it would be a pick 'em because the Ravens are the home team and they're getting the old home 3-point favorites. So I believe the Ravens are 3-point favorites. I kind of sense that this might be a high scoring game. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that was what I felt. But I will start with you, Greg. I mean, you said you took a while to deliberate.
Yeah.
What did you come up with?
I, I, I feel like this is going to be a really physical, hard-fought game, and I think I do believe as good as the backs are, okay, and you could argue they're the two best, runners in the league, okay. I think the quarterbacks are going to be a big factor in this game, and not necessarily because they're going to go 30 for 35 for 450 yards, because of the multi-dimensional nature of their play. I think like I said, it's a toss-up. I'm going to pick the Ravens, and just because I feel like Lamar, and I don't get into people's heads, but I just have a feeling to him, this is a huge game. Because, they have 4 losses, right?
They do.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
Everybody keeps talking about the Ravens, the Ravens, the Ravens, and they have 4 losses.
Yep.
It's not like they're, they lose games.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick the Ravens, and I'm going to go 27-23, and I'm going to pick Lamar.
Oh, man, I'm close.
27-23 Lamar. By the way, the Ravens started off 0-2. They lost to the Chiefs in the season opener and then came home and blew a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter to the Raiders.
I know. And then blew out the Bills. I mean,
right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's the NFL for you. And of course, the Browns and the Steelers are their other losses. So Adam, by the way, 51.5 is the over-under for this game. So the odds makers also agree with Greg's assessment that there's going to be some points scored in this game.
Yeah, I've got it. Ravens 28, Eagles 20, and I do have Lamar. I think he's going to count for 4 touchdowns. He's going to get Andrews for a touchdown. He's going to run at least 1 in, maybe 2. I'm hoping that in the fourth quarter that we see some magic though from the Eagles side to keep this game close. I just feel like I'm worried about. I said this on our show earlier this week and also to the Patreon people. I'm worried about the loss of BG. I'm just because of his tenacity and his consistency, particularly against the run. Yes, he's a really good pass rusher, but I'm worried about the run defense in particular without him because he's very underrated in that area. And I feel like this is sort of one of those. It's a non-conference game, short week. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't see it. I got it. Ravens 28-20, Lamar being the MVP of this game.
All right. I have a high-scoring game. I kind of have a feel that this game is going to be the Ravens are going to get up early. The Eagles are going to come back into it, but that the Ravens will pull away in the fourth quarter because of Derrick Henry against a tired Eagles defense. So I have the Ravens winning 33-26. It's a one possession.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
But I just think, and I'm going to use Derrick Henry as my MVP. I think it's not that I think he's going to have 180 yards. I think they'll do all right against him, but I think he'll have 2 touchdowns, the last one being the one that seals the game. So that's why I'm giving him my MVP.
It's funny because I kept thinking about, and Adam mentioned it, and he's 100% right, what Adam said. I kept thinking about A.J. Brown because I do think
what I
they're
was
going to have to throw the ball. And when I say throw it, I don't mean he's going to drop back 45 times. but I think they're going to have to throw it a little bit in this game, and I don't think they have anybody who can really cover AJ Brown.
That's a fair
And even
point.
though they're not a man team in a strict set, they do play
Yeah.
man. I don't,
Sure.
you still, depending on routes and particularly working outside the numbers, you do have to match up.
Right.
So part of me was like, okay, I think AJ Brown could have one of those 8 for 140 games, and he still could. They could lose even if he goes 8 for 140.
Sure.
But I think they're going to have to throw it a bit in this game.
I agree.
Let's put it this way.
Yep.
I don't think it can be a game where, Jalen has, is 14 for 19 and it's the fourth quarter.
Well,
Exactly.
it's funny because you did make the point earlier that you think that if they're behind, they'll still stay with the run. But see, I think I'm gonna be a little bit different.
You can. Hey, I don't. It's not like I've got a direct
Nobody's
line here.
Nostradamus.
No one's a
just say
Kreskin
differently.
here.
No, but I think because you outlined it for us. Brandon Stevens is an okay corner. Nate Wiggins is not like he's not a thick corner, like he's super overly physical. I think there are plays that are to be made. They've given up a number of big plays. I like how you outlined it, Greg, about they've been trying some different things. They've gotten burned by it. I'm expecting a huge game from AJ Brown. I know they still have a very good defense. It's hard to run against them. That's also the thing.
Here's one other point, which we didn't mention, but if I could throw it out.
Sure.
Finish it out. The Eagles have become a fairly high percentage 12 personnel team based on, teams in the league.
Yep.
If they do that, Humphrey will be on the outside with Stevens, not Wiggins. So the question is, how do they want to play it, the Eagles? Do they want to go a little more 11? I mean, it all depends on availability of players, obviously. Maybe they don't feel they can line up with 11 and put out good people. Maybe they feel they're better with Goddard and Calcaterra because obviously Goddard's Goddard and Calcaterra's a pretty good player. So now that factors into this game as well because if they're in base, Humphrey will play on the outside, not Wiggins.
Love it. A lot of firepower.
Stuff.
A lot of
This
firepower
game has,
on display.
that's why I'm glad we got through a lot. This game has so many tactical elements, and we, obviously we don't know the answers. We're not the coaches. Even the coaches don't know the answers either. They think, they game plan, they prepare.
Yeah.
Like I love when coaches, when a team gets beaten, they say, "Oh, just bad job of coaching." Well, they didn't think that way building up to the week. They thought they were doing a great job and doing the right thing, but sometimes it just doesn't work out the way you expected to based on the information at hand.
By the way, one thing I want to add. Chase, Jamar Chase absolutely annihilated the Ravens defense.
Yeah.
Okay, 11 for 264 and 3. He's a physical player. So is AJ Brown. I'm just saying. I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to bring it up if you didn't.
Yeah.
Let's just see what happens.
Well, he had 2 unbelievable games against them.
Wow. Well, don't those two teams always play that kind of high scoring?
Yeah, they play that kind of, and maybe this will be that game.
Yeah.
It could be that game.
Yeah. Well, that's what we've done the analysis. Now it's just time for them to go out and make the plays, and we'll see what happens. That's going to do it for this edition of the Inside the Birds pregame show. Make sure you catch Inside the Birds postgame live. Myself, Adam Caplan. It'll be a doozy. Thanks everybody for watching. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Enjoy your football.